For most of the world, Mike Tyson was a legend, a heavyweight champion, a warrior, a man whose name alone carried the weight of power and intimidation. But there were things about him the cameras never captured, stories that never made headlines, moments where the fighter wasn't in a ring, but still fighting for something real. And on this particular day, he wasn't walking into an arena. He was walking into a place where kids didn't have parents to cheer for them, where dreams felt like distant echoes, where the only fights that happened were the ones no one saw, against loneliness, against fear, against the feeling that the world had already given up on them. As he stepped through the entrance of the children's home, the usual noise of laughter, scattered conversations, and restless movement slowed. Heads turned. Some kids whispered. Some stared. Most of them had never seen him in real life, only in highlights, only in movies, only as a larger-than-life figure who had nothing to do with their world. But there was one boy. A boy who didn't whisper. A boy who didn't just see Mike Tyson, but recognized something in him. And in that moment, Mike saw something in the boy too. Something that reminded him of himself. Something that made him realize this visit wasn't going to be like any other. Because today, he wasn't just here to meet these kids. He was about to change a life. Mike had been in countless rooms that fell silent the moment he walked in. But this one felt different. The children's home wasn't a place of flashing cameras or roaring crowds. It smelled like old books and floor cleaner, like cafeteria trays and something faintly familiar, maybe the kind of air that only existed in places where kids stayed but never really belonged. He adjusted the sleeves of his jacket as he stepped further inside. The usual noise, the distant clatter of dishes, muffled conversations, laughter, had faded the second he crossed the doorway. Kids turned to look. Some whispered, nudging their friends. Others just stared, wide-eyed. Mike was used to that. He wasn't used to the feeling that came with it. Because this wasn't an arena. No one here was cheering for him. No one was asking for autographs. They were just watching, unsure of what to do with him. And then he noticed one boy. He wasn't whispering. Wasn't nudging anyone. He just stood there, eyes locked on Mike, like he recognized something the others didn't. Mike felt it too. Something about the kid, the way he stood, the way his expression didn't change, the way his eyes weren't filled with awe, but something else reminded him of himself. And in that moment, he knew. This wasn't going to be just another visit. The woman in charge of the children's home, a thin lady with tired eyes and a warm but practiced smile, introduced herself with the kind of energy people use when they've repeated the same speech 100 times before and don't expect anything new to come from it. She was polite, professional, and clearly grateful that someone like Mike Tyson had chosen to visit, but there was also a guardedness to her tone, the kind that came from years of managing expectations, from knowing that not all promises lasted, and that for some of these kids, hope was a fragile thing that had been broken too many times already. Mike listened, nodding at the right moments, his expression calm, but his mind wasn't fully on her words. It was on the room, on the air, on the way the kids moved, on the way they looked at him, some with excitement, some with confusion, some with indifference, like they had seen people come and go before and didn't expect this to be any different. And then, his eyes landed on him. Among the shifting bodies, the turned heads, the hushed whispers, there was one boy who didn't move like the others, didn't whisper to his friend, didn't try to catch someone's eye to share the moment. He just stood there, hands in the pockets of a hoodie that was slightly too big for him, shoulders set in a way that was neither defensive nor relaxed, eyes locked onto Mike like he wasn't just seeing him, but studying him, like he was trying to figure out something deeper than the obvious. Mike had met a lot of people in his life, had seen every kind of look a person could give him, adoration, intimidation, envy, respect, fear, but this wasn't any of those. This was different. It wasn't the look of someone meeting a celebrity. It was the look of someone recognizing something familiar. "What's your name?" Mike hadn't realized he said it out loud until the boy's head tilted slightly, just enough to acknowledge the question, just enough to show he had heard it, but not so much that it looked like he was eager to answer. For a second, the silence stretched between them, not awkward but heavy, like neither of them was in a rush to break it. And then, finally, the boy spoke. Dante. Simple. Direct. No extra words. No explanation. Just his name, given without hesitation, but also without effort, like it was just a fact, like it didn't carry any weight, even though Mike had a feeling it did. How long you been here, Dante? The boy shrugged, a slow, almost uninterested motion, as if the answer itself wasn't important. Couple years. No details. No backstory. But Mike knew that kind of answer, because he had given it himself before, back when he was a kid, back when people asked him about his past and he didn't feel like telling them, back when time didn't feel like something you measured in days or months, but in how many times you had to start over. A couple of years in a place like this meant something different than a couple of years anywhere else. Mike didn't press him. He had learned a long time ago that the most important conversations weren't always the ones that filled the air with words. Sometimes, the silence between the words was louder. Dante didn't look away, didn't fidget, didn't try to end the moment with a joke or a question. He just stood there, letting the quiet settle, letting Mike see him exactly as he was, without trying to be anything else. And Mike respected that. The woman leading the visit glanced between them, her practiced smile faltering slightly, her hands clasped in that polite way people do when they're trying to move things along without making it obvious. We have a little tour planned, if you'd like, she said, directing the words more at Mike than Dante, trying to reclaim the flow of the visit. Mike nodded, but he didn't move yet. Because Dante was still there. And something about the way the boy hadn't stepped back, hadn't dismissed the conversation, made Mike realize that this moment wasn't over yet. Dante didn't say much, but he didn't need to. His posture, his expression, the way he held himself, it all told a story, one that Mike could read without needing subtitles. This was a kid who had learned to expect little and take even less, a kid who had been watching the world from the outside long enough to know that it rarely invited people like him in. Mike knew that story. Because once, it had been his. Most kids in this home probably knew who he was, maybe from old fights, maybe from movies, maybe just from hearing his name, but Dante wasn't looking at him like a famous boxer. He was looking at him like someone who had been where he was. And that was different. Because admiration fades. But recognition? That sticks. Mike wasn't sure what made him say it, wasn't sure if it was instinct or something deeper, but before the moment could pass, before the weight of it could slip away into just another interaction that didn't matter, he spoke again. You box? Dante blinked once. Not surprised, not excited, just processing. And then, finally, he answered. A little. And that was enough. The rest of the visit continued as planned, introductions, polite conversation, a tour, but for Mike, something had already shifted. Because he wasn't just here to shake hands and take pictures anymore. He was here because of a kid who didn't whisper. A kid who didn't just see him, but recognized him. And in that moment, Mike knew this wasn't just going to be another visit. This was the start of something real. The room buzzed with excitement, kids tossing questions at him like they were throwing punches, quick, eager, barely waiting for answers. Some were asking just to ask, some wanted to impress their friends, and some were genuinely curious, hoping he'd drop some secret about how to be strong, how to be fast, how to be something more than just a kid in a place like this. Mike smiled, answering in that easy way he had mastered over the years, giving them just enough to keep them entertained. But his focus wasn't on them. Not really. Because across the room, there was one kid who wasn't asking anything, who wasn't trying to be part of the noise. And sometimes, the quiet ones were the ones you had to pay attention to. Dante didn't stand at the front of the group, didn't push his way into the spotlight, didn't even pretend to be interested in the excitement of the others. He stood at the edge of it all, arms crossed, his expression unreadable, not cold, not unimpressed, just watching. Not the way a fan watched, not the way someone amazed by a legend watched, but the way someone who was measuring something watched. Mike had seen that look before. Had given that look before. It wasn't admiration. It was assessment. There were kids who saw him and only saw the name, the stories, the knockouts, the fame. They saw the heavyweight champion, the fighter, the legend. But Dante wasn't looking at him like a legend. He was looking at him like a man. And that was different. Someone asked him to throw a few punches just to show them how it was done. A few of the kids mimicked the movement, their jabs wild and exaggerated, their footwork non-existent. They laughed at each other, bumping shoulders, trying to see who could get the closest to looking like a real fighter. Mike played along, showing them a proper stance, a quick snap of his fist, the kind of small, controlled power that made a real punch dangerous. The kids cheered. Dante didn't. Dante just nodded slightly, like he understood something the others didn't. "Y'all got a gym here?" Mike asked, wiping his hands together like he was shaking off dust. The woman leading the visit nodded, already moving toward the hallway. "It's not much, but we make do." That wasn't what Mike had asked. He glanced toward Dante. "Come with me," he said. Not a question. Not a demand. Just an invitation. Dante didn't answer right away. He didn't look around for permission, didn't check to see if anyone was watching. He just held Mike's gaze for a long second, then gave a small shrug. "All right." The gym was small. A couple of punching bags hanging from rusted chains. A worn-out weight bench. A few scattered mats that had been taped at the edges to keep them from peeling apart. It smelled like sweat and old rubber. Mike had trained in places like this before. Had made himself in places like this before. It wasn't about the equipment. It was about the work. The other kids were still laughing, throwing playful punches, acting like this was just another part of the visit. Dante wasn't. When he pulled on the gloves Mike handed him, there was no fumbling, no hesitation, no adjusting just to make sure they looked cool. His fingers curled around the inside, his stance shifted slightly, his shoulders loosened. It was instinct. Mike knew that feeling. It was the way your body remembered before your mind even had to think about it. Mike raised his hands, giving Dante a target. "Show me." Dante didn't ask what he meant. He just moved. The first punch was fast, not reckless, not wild, but quick and controlled. A clean jab. The kind you don't just throw by accident. Mike nodded. Again. Dante threw another. Adjusted slightly. Already correcting himself. Mike wasn't smiling anymore. This kid wasn't pretending. Fists tell a story. They tell where you've been, what you've had to fight against, whether you swing out of anger or out of survival. Dante's fists didn't tell a story of anger. They told a story of someone who had been hit before. Someone who knew what it was like to stand his ground when there was nowhere else to go. And that was something you couldn't teach. Mike didn't say anything for a while, just let the moment sit between them, let Dante feel what it was like to be seen, really seen, for what he was. "You ever think about doing this for real?" Mike asked. Dante didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, he already had. Mike reached into his pocket, pulled out a small piece of paper, and held it out. A name. A number. A place. "I don't give this to just anyone," Mike said. "If you want it, it's yours." Dante didn't reach for it immediately. But when he did, when his fingers closed around the paper, Mike already knew. He had made up his mind. And now? Everything was about to change. Mike had walked through 1,000 gym doors before, each with its own smell of sweat and leather, each filled with fighters who had something to prove, men who carried their stories in their fists, trainers who had seen every type of hunger a person could bring into a ring. But stepping into this gym, he wasn't met with the usual sounds of jump ropes slapping against the floor, of speed bags rattling under precise hands, of trainers barking corrections at kids who were too tired to listen but too determined to stop. This gym was different. The air was still. The walls were old, the mats frayed at the edges, the punching bags sagging from years of weight pulling them down. There was no roar of a crowd, no scent of liniment oil, no metallic clang of weights being racked by bodies desperate to grow stronger. There was just a quiet space where kids came to move, to burn energy, to let out whatever they weren't allowed to say out loud. And standing in the middle of it, taking it all in, was Dante. The punching bag closest to the door was covered in duct tape, patches slapped over holes that had been hit through the fabric over the years. A row of free weights lined the back wall, most of them mismatched, some rusted at the edges, all of them collected over time from donations or leftovers from trainers who had come and gone. A set of gloves sat on the floor, the leather cracked, the padding worn thin, the laces frayed from too many hands pulling them too tight. To anyone else, this place might have looked like a lost cause. To Mike, it looked like home. Because the gym wasn't about the equipment. It was about what a person could become inside it. The other kids had followed them in, still joking, still talking too loudly, still throwing fake punches at each other like they were already in a championship fight. They laughed as they hopped onto the mats, tried balancing on one foot, tested out the weight of the jump ropes like they were toys. But Dante didn't join them. He stood by the wall, watching, measuring, like he was trying to figure out if this was a place where he belonged. Mike didn't tell Dante to step forward. He didn't call him out in front of the others, didn't force him into the spotlight. He didn't have to. He just walked over to a pair of gloves, picked them up, and tossed them toward the kid without a word. Dante caught them without hesitation, his fingers curling around the laces, his shoulders rolling back slightly as he turned them over in his hands. He didn't smile. Didn't act like it was a big deal. But he didn't put them down either. The laughter in the background started to fade. The other kids, still messing around, started watching now. They weren't sure why. Something had changed. The energy in the room had tilted. And Mike could feel it, Dante could feel it too. This wasn't play anymore. This was something else. Dante didn't ask what he was supposed to do. He already knew. He slipped the gloves on, one after the other, his movements quick but careful, like someone who had done it before, like someone who had learned the hard way that rushing led to mistakes. And then he raised his hands. Not like a kid playing pretend. Like a fighter. Mike had seen that stance before. On himself. Mike lifted his hands, offering a target. "Go ahead," he said. Dante didn't hesitate. The first punch was fast. Crisp. Not wild. Not reckless. The second one followed just as clean, just as sharp, his foot shifting just enough to angle himself correctly, his shoulders rotating through the movement the way someone does when they understand that power doesn't come from just your hands, it comes from the ground up. And Mike knew. This wasn't a kid who was learning to fight. This was a kid who already had. Mike stepped back, letting Dante breathe, letting him process what had just happened. Because this wasn't about whether or not he had potential. Mike had already seen that. This was about whether or not Dante was ready to see it too. Dante lowered his hands, his breathing even, his expression still unreadable. But his eyes? His eyes were different now. Not harder. Not colder. Just aware. Like something inside him had settled. Like something had clicked into place. And Mike knew this wasn't just another moment that would fade. This was a moment that would stick. Mike didn't hand out praise easily. He didn't believe in filling a kid's head with empty words just because they wanted to hear them. But he also knew when something needed to be said. "You're good," he said, his voice steady. "Really good." Dante didn't react. Didn't smile. Didn't deflect with a joke like some kids did when they didn't know how to handle a compliment. He just nodded. Because he already knew. And now? Now, he knew that Mike knew too. Mike had spent his entire life around noise, roaring crowds, shouting trainers, the sound of fists smacking into pads, the chaotic energy of gym floors filled with fighters trying to prove something. But here, standing in this quiet gym, watching Dante flex his fingers inside those old gloves, feeling the weight of something unspoken settle between them, he realized that sometimes silence told you more than words ever could. Dante didn't ask what was next, didn't look around for validation, didn't fidget the way kids do when they're out of their element. He just stood there, steady, waiting, not because he wasn't nervous, but because he had already decided he belonged here, and Mike knew that feeling, that stillness before a fight. The kind that came not from arrogance, but from understanding that whatever happened next was already in motion, that hesitation didn't change anything, that the only thing left to do was step forward. Most kids in a place like this would have swung wildly, eager to impress, eager to show off, eager to let their energy take over before their technique ever had a chance to catch up. But Dante wasn't like most kids. And Mike saw that the moment the boy adjusted his stance, the way his feet moved just slightly to find the right balance, the way his shoulders relaxed instead of tensing, the way his breath came slow and measured, like he already understood that fighting wasn't just about throwing hands, it was about control, about knowing when to move and when to wait, about understanding that power didn't come from force alone. And Mike, watching this kid, already knew that he wasn't looking at someone who wanted to be a fighter for the sake of it. He was looking at someone who needed it, someone who had learned to fight long before he had ever put on gloves. Mike held up his hands, palms open, offering a target, offering something to measure against, offering a moment that wasn't about impressing anyone else in the room, but about proving something to himself. Because this wasn't about training, not yet. This wasn't about coaching. This was about seeing what the kid had, about seeing if the fire inside him was real or if it was just smoke. And Dante, without hesitation, without asking, without overthinking, threw the first punch, and the moment it connected, the sharp snap of leather meeting flesh, the way the impact landed clean and solid without wasted energy, Mike knew this wasn't a kid who just swung to hit something. This was a kid who understood what it meant to land a punch. You can tell a lot about a person from the way they fight, not just from their skill, not just from their power, but from the way they move, from the way they hold themselves, from whether or not they flinch, from whether or not they understand that a fight isn't just about hurting the other guy, it's about survival, it's about control. And Dante, with every movement, with every small shift in his footing, with every breath, with every look, was showing Mike something more than just potential. He was showing experience, he was showing understanding, he was showing that he had already been in fights that mattered, fights that weren't about belts or titles or crowds, but about proving something in a world that didn't give you anything unless you took it for yourself. Dante didn't ask for approval, didn't wait for praise, didn't need someone to tell him he was good, because he already knew, not in an arrogant way, not in the way kids sometimes assume they're better than they are, but in the way that comes from knowing your own body, from knowing what it means to be hit and to keep standing, from knowing that skill wasn't just something you had, it was something you carried, something you relied on when everything else failed. And Mike, lowering his hands, letting the kid step back, steadying the way he barely seemed out of breath, realized that he wasn't just seeing himself in this boy, he was seeing something even more dangerous. He was seeing someone who hadn't yet realized how much he was capable of. Most kids, when they started boxing, thought power was everything, thought the harder they hit, the better they were. But Mike knew better. Mike knew that real fighters weren't the ones who hit the hardest. They were the ones who hit at the right time, who knew when to take their shot, who understood that precision mattered more than brute strength. And Dante, standing there, waiting for whatever came next, had already figured that out, because he wasn't swinging wild, wasn't trying to show off, wasn't burning himself out trying to make an impression. He was just moving the way someone moves when they trust their body, when they trust their instincts, when they trust that they already know what to do. You ever think about doing this for real? Mike asked, and the moment the words left his mouth, he saw the way Dante's fingers curled just slightly inside his gloves, the way his jaw tensed for half a second, the way his eyes flicked downward, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he had already thought about it, had already let the idea sit somewhere in the back of his mind, had already wondered if this was something he could really do, if this was something he was allowed to want. And Mike, recognizing that hesitation, recognizing that doubt, didn't push, didn't demand an answer, just let the silence stretch between them, because sometimes a person needs time to admit to themselves what they already know. Mike reached into his pocket, pulled out a small piece of paper, unfolded it, and held it out, not forcing it into Dante's hands, not pressuring him, just letting it be there, letting the kid decide what to do with it. Because this wasn't a gift, wasn't charity, wasn't something being handed out to just anyone. This was an opportunity, and opportunity only meant something if you were willing to take it. And Dante, staring at that paper, staring at the name and number written on it, didn't grab it right away, didn't rush, didn't let excitement override the weight of the moment. He just stood there, thinking, deciding, knowing that once he reached for it, once he took it, things would be different. Dante lifted his hand, slow but certain, taking the paper, folding it carefully before slipping it into his pocket, and in that simple movement, and that one choice, Mike already knew. He didn't need to say anything, didn't need to push, didn't need to explain what this meant, because Dante wasn't the kind of kid who took things just to take them. He wasn't the kind of kid who reached for something unless he already knew he was going to follow through, and Mike, watching him, watching the way his shoulders squared just slightly, watching the way he took a slow breath like he was preparing himself for something he hadn't said out loud yet, realized that he had just witnessed the start of something real. Mike had met a lot of kids in a lot of gyms, had seen talent come and go, had watched kids with potential wasted, had seen kids with hunger burn out before they ever got the chance to be great, but standing there, watching Dante, knowing what he knew now, he had a feeling that this was different, that this wasn't just another moment, that this wasn't just another kid who would disappear into the world without ever seeing what he was capable of, because this wasn't just about fighting, this wasn't just about skill, this was about something deeper, something that couldn't be taught, something that had to already exist inside you, and Dante had it, the kind of fire that didn't fade, the kind of fire that only burned brighter once it had been seen. Mike didn't say much after Dante took the paper, didn't need to, because the choice had already been made, even if Dante wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. The other kids were still playing around, throwing sloppy punches at the air, laughing at themselves, acting like this was just another part of the visit, but Mike knew that for Dante, this wasn't just another afternoon. This was a turning point, the kind that didn't feel big when it happened, but changed everything later. They stood there for a moment longer, letting the energy settle between them, letting the weight of what came next hang in the air, and then, like it wasn't a big deal at all, like it was just another normal day, Mike clapped him on the shoulder, gave him a nod, and said, "You know where to find me." On the way out, Mike moved through the usual routine, shaking hands, taking a few pictures, giving a couple of generic words of encouragement to kids who might remember this day forever or might forget it by next week. The woman in charge thanked him again, her smile genuine but tired, the kind of expression people wore when they wanted to believe that something good would come from moments like this, but had seen too many people come and go to be sure. Mike didn't promise anything. He never did. He just gave a final nod, stepped into the car waiting outside, and leaned back as the city started moving past him. For most people, this was just another visit, just another PR moment, just another good deed done, but Mike knew better. Somewhere in that building, there was a kid staring at a folded piece of paper in his pocket, trying to decide whether or not to use it, and Mike had a feeling the decision had already been made. Mike didn't need to wonder if he'd hear from Dante again. He had met a lot of people in his life, had seen a lot of kids with talent, with hunger, with something real burning inside them, but not all of them had the courage to follow through. Dante did. He knew it the moment he saw him throw that first punch, the moment he saw the way he carried himself, the way he didn't flinch, didn't fold, didn't ask for anything he wasn't willing to work for. It might not be tomorrow, might not even be next week, but at some point, that phone was going to ring, and Mike already knew what he would say when it did. "Welcome to the gym, kid. Now let's see what you can really do."